Hey, and welcome back. This is just a slight continuation of Newton's second law of motion's notes. You might remember previously, if I pull this up, we kind of went through and we talked a little bit about how to find Newton's second law with using the equation force equals mass times acceleration, which is this right here. A couple of different things is, so if you think back, we were provided with all of the pieces of information. However, sometimes things are just being accelerated due to gravity. So if we think back to these two terms, force increases acceleration, mass decreases acceleration. Well, sometimes that force is just gravity. So we kind of went through some of these. We talked about there's Sally. So we need to address clearly gravity here on Earth, and then the lack of gravity in some spaces, or the change of gravity depending on the mass of another object. So if you've ever seen a video of someone like Neil Armstrong on the moon, he kind of walks with a little bit of a bounce. That's because the moon has less gravity than the Earth does. So there's still, the astronauts that are there are still pulled to the moon. It's just that they are definitely not, the gravity is not as forceful as it is here on Earth. And actually SpaceX just had 2 astronauts today. I'm recording this on August 3rd. So 2 astronauts just actually returned back from home with SpaceX. So lots of cool things happening in space that we'll kind of start getting into as we kind of move through how gravity and forces act on objects. So in general though, gravity is anything that has mass is attracted by a force of gravity. And that's a really important term to kind of keep in mind as we move forward. We haven't talked about Newton's third law of motion just yet, and that kind of comes into play. And then as we start to get into talking about impulses and how things can collide, we have to remember that gravity is acting on those objects as well. Sometimes really, really forcefully, sometimes not so much. So anything that has mass has gravity. So you have mass. However, when you walk down the hall at school, the lockers don't fly open and books and pencils and all that kind of stuff don't come flying out at you, because your mass is very small and minute compared to the Earth's mass. And so it kind of trumps your mass. So let's say though that congratulations, you were hired by SpaceX and Elon Musk is sending you out to test a whole bunch of different theories on gravity. So you get to ride in the new sleek Falcon 9 and go up into space and then do a spacewalk. So if they push you far enough away from the actual space station or spaceship, you're pretty much weightless at that moment. But you still have mass, because you still have your body, and mass is what you are made up of. So let's say that the experiment was that you had a bag of marbles and you threw them into the space around you. What would happen? They would actually start orbiting you, or they'd be attracted toward you, because you would have the most mass in that area, and they would then have you would have a gravitational force. And that's what this is kind of saying. Anything that has mass has gravity. So you have gravity because you have mass. Even small little protons and neutrons have a mass. Even electrons have a mass. They're just very, very, very tiny. So we'll talk about things that can cause small electrical energy charges, and then things that cause massive energy charges. So gravity is an attractive force between 2 objects that depend on the mass of the object and the distance between them. So the closer things are together, the more gravitational pull they're going to have. The further they are apart, not so much. So let's kind of think about this in terms of space. So the sun is the third rock from the sun. So we have a pretty close distance with the sun. Whereas good old Pluto, let's talk about Pluto, even though it's still in our solar system, it's been demoted down to a dwarf planet. We've started to become a little bit more categorized and organized with our definitions. And Pluto doesn't fit some of the bill when it comes to just planets. So what's happened is that the distance between them are greatly different between the sun and Pluto and the sun and Earth. And so the gravitational pull is very, very different. If something were to run into Pluto, let's say another rogue planet or something, it could technically knock it off of its orbit that the sun is trying to hold it into and cause it just to kind of go sending out there. Let's say that it was a small object about the size of the moon. Could totally happen. If the moon were to run into the Earth, probably wobble us a good bit, but we wouldn't hopefully go flying out because our distance is much closer, and therefore the sun's gravitational pull is going to want to hold us in. And the sun is super massive, super, 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 very, very raw. It's huge, really, really big. So just to kind of jump back here to Earth, though, instead of out in space, the Earth's gravitational pull is always acting on us, which is a acceleration rate of 9.8 meters per second squared. And this is an extremely important number. Tattoo it to your brain. Memorize this one. This is one that we will use quite a bit as we kind of move through the next couple of weeks. So it says, if all their forces were eliminated, all objects would fall at 9.8 meters per second squared. Meaning that if we were to take out all the air in the Earth's atmosphere and everything like that, everything would fall at this 9.8 meters per second squared. But there's other forces that are acting on things as they fall. So air resistance, wind, you might run into like a tree or something like that, or maybe it's a thick cloud that you might be going through, or whatever it may be. So we are going to use that number, though, quite a bit. So when acceleration is not applied, sometimes you can use that 9.8 to kind of insert into a calculation and kind of talk about it. So weight is mass times free fall acceleration. So your mass times the 9.8 meters per second squared. And free fall is an object's mass times the acceleration of gravity, that 9.8 meters per second squared. This is one that we'll talk a little bit about as we kind of move into impulse, but felt that it was important to kind of go over the gravity of all three of those. Or all two of those. So once again, gravity is anything that has mass is going to have gravity. And then here on Earth, our gravity that we're going to focus in on is at 9.8 meters per second squared. Thanks.